Bienvenue à tous, merci de votre participation. Pour écouter notre session en français, veuillez cliquer en bas de votre écran sur l'onglet « Interprétation » et sélectionner le drapeau français. Merci.
On behalf of ICLEI Africa, the African Center for Cities, Our Future Cities, Surge Africa, and the Red Cross Crescent Climate Center, we are delighted to welcome you to the Rise Africa 2024 Action Festival. Rise Africa is a platform that brings together thinkers, doers, and enablers to inspire action for sustainable cities. This is our 4th edition of our Rise Africa Action Festival, which brings together insights, practices, and visions from across the continent under this year's theme of Solutions Only, Failures Also. This year's theme provokes us to change the way we view our cities and approach their development, particularly to promote a solutions orientation to our worldview. The festival invites you to embrace different ways of knowing, to seek ways to bridge science, policy, business, and arts in creative ways. It invites you to forge new partnerships, experiment with new concepts and ideas, and drive change in your homes and communities. This year's festival, we are running a social media storm to share how urbanization is happening in Africa, that cities can be centers of possibility, and how we can inspire action for sustainable African cities. Please share these for the days of the festival, including Africa Day, the 25th of May. As is tradition, we invite you to enter this session in a spirit of creativity.
Hello, my name is Gesha Aletta, and my poem is titled, How Can We Be Afraid of the Light? The hour before dawn rouses the birds. They sing their excitement for the light. We toss and turn beneath our covers. We choose sleeping rather than sight. Without resting, there can be no labor. We need the darkness for a season. When the time comes to turn the light on, we're beside ourselves with reasons. Why we can't turn off the beaten path. Why what it asks is maybe decades or centuries away. Why it's too great to bear the burden that change asks. Why the fire and the light are dangerous because of the trails they blaze. He said, the truth will set you free, but first it will piss you off. We want change to seduce us boldly, but only with the lights off. How can we be afraid of the light? How can we hide from the glistening of tears? How can we abandon our efforts and failures? How can we be corralled by our fears? How can we be afraid of the light? How can we shy away from smiling with all our teeth? Why don't we bind our wounds with laughter's balm? How dare we bury our humanity beneath? There's a beating heart in every chest, and it's longing for a chance to run towards the finish line, whether it comes first or last. Hearts aren't swayed by competition to cease beating because of the chorus of other beating hearts. When did we become renegades towards this intuition? Perhaps if we stop trying to conquer, colonize, destroy, dominate, is where winning starts.
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. Welcome to our session. Our session is looking at the power of collaborative thinking, tackling climate impacts in Lusaka through a multi-stakeholder training. Today, I have about 5 trainers. Our first trainer will be Gertrude Ngenda. Gertrude Ngenda is a private consultant and lead and founder of Sustainable Development Network and Resource Center. And she's been working with different institutions, but what is interesting to note is that she was one of the first regional directors for ICLEI Africa. So I'm happy to welcome Gertrude, and maybe Gertrude could say hi to the audience. Then I also have Professor Nchito. Professor Nchito is in the Department of Geography and Environmental Studies at the University of Zambia. Her research covers informalities in cities, climate change, and small town development, tourism, urban flooding, transport, water and sanitation, and she's been involved in the National Urbanization Policy and National Planning Framework. Welcome, Dr. Nchito, to the session. Professor Nchito, sorry. Then I also have Lwendo. Lwendo is a town planner. She has worked for both the government and the private sector. She participated in the Zero Carbon Conference in 2014. She's been an assistant researcher under the Urban Forest Research Project that was conducted by the University of Copperbelt University. And right now, Lwendo is working as a town planner. And I also have Sylvia. Sylvia Masebo is working with the Ministry of Local Government. She's an expert in urban planning, socio-economic planning, and has done a lot of work around our topic as well. Then lastly, I have Ida Sakala. Ida is also an urban planner, and she has hands-on experience in spatial planning and has successfully led a number of projects in sustainable development and community well-being. Welcome, Ida, to our session. Today's session, we will cover two presentations. The first presentation from Professor Nchito, and it's focusing on how do we build climate resilience using nature-based solutions in the community, and what are some of the strategies that we can use to do so. I hand over to you, Amy, and Dr. Nchito. We can start the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Walia, for that introduction. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Okay, thank you for that introduction. And as you've been told, I don't know where my, we're looking at the power of collaborative thinking, tackling climate impacts in Lusaka through stakeholder training. And I was asked to look at building climate resistance using nature-based solutions in the community. And so I'm looking at strategies from the grassroots. So that's just an outline of my presentation. I decided to look at the main questions when we're doing research or when we're doing an analysis. It's the what, why, who, how. I haven't really done the where, but I've used those questions. So I'll look at those questions and we'll look at examples of adaptive measures and nature-based solutions. I won't go into the statistics of the globalizing world where we're mostly urbanizing, statistics of climate change. I think we've heard them often enough. But what I want to give is a brief history of Lusaka and its flooding incidences. So Lusaka has always flooded from time immemorial. It's just that now with climate change, the incidences have increased, and as we have sprawled as a city, the impacts are reaching further than they used to. So it feels as if it's worse, but it has always been a flooding city. And the most impacted areas are unplanned settlements, which are located around the city.
Hi, Professor. We've lost you briefly. We'll just give a minute and see if she comes back. Otherwise, whoop. Okay, we've lost her, unfortunately. There is some load shedding problems in Zambia at the moment, so that could be the reason. Walia, I'll take your advice, but perhaps Gertrude can start and we can come back to Professor Nchito.
Yes, so I think we can go to get and then come back once she's online. But let me.
So Gertrude, if you'd like to go ahead and share your screen and start your presentation, that'd be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
but I can't see my face. Maybe to come.
We can see it, don't worry.
All right, I can't see it. Let me share the screen. Gosh. Okay. Yeah, my name is Gertrude. I'm also an urban planner. I am going to talk about the key concepts and strategies for dealing with climate change impact, especially in urban centers. There are so many concepts, so I just try to pick up a few, maybe 15. I'll try to go through them quickly, and then just talk about them. I think the first one is mitigation. The first two are mitigation and adaptation. And okay, let me go to presentation. Sorry. Yeah, okay. Just adjusting my screen. So mitigation, as everybody knows on this panel, in this training, is that mitigation is reducing greenhouse gas emissions to slow down the rate of climate change. And then adaptation, on the other hand, is just adjusting to the current and expected impacts of climate change, such as sea level rise or more frequent natural disaster. So mitigation and adaptation are essentially and complementary processes to deal with climate change and safeguard the future of ecosystems, population, and economic activities. I think Dr. Nchito was just starting to explain that Lusaka is so prone to flooding, and sometimes we have heat waves. So I have just a small slide here just to show what adaptation is and some of the strategies that can be undertaken. So as regards mitigation, there are efforts at renewable energy, more efficient industrial processes, eco-friendly transportation, and of course, changes in eating habits. And as opposed to adaptation, where we are looking at more resilient systems, things like smart agriculture, delimitation of coastal risk areas, flood barriers in urban places, or just strategies that to reduce the impact of the floods, like drains and things like that. Okay, so I'm jumping, what's happening? So I'll go back to this. I don't seem to be managing it well. Okay, this slide also just shows the difference between mitigation and adaptation. And this is just a slide which I always use to illustrate mitigation, adaptation, and adaptive capacity. Here you see that there's a pan, and if it gets hot, if the impacts get too much, you jump out. And here you mitigate, you try and cool off the pot so that you are also cooled inside the pot. And the other one, you do something, but you still stay in the hot pot. Just another way of illustrating the differences between the two concepts. The next concept is adaptive capacity and vulnerability. So adaptive capacity is the ability of a system to adjust to climate change, including climate variability and extremes, to moderate potential damages and to take advantage of opportunities or to cope with the consequences. So here, I think the most important thing is because when we are looking at adaptive capacity, mostly we are in the urban areas, we are looking at the urban poor, the people in the settlements. What is it that they can do? or how much can they do to cope with the effects of climate change. So there are quite a number of things, and these concepts just explain what it is. Exposure is the contact between a person and one or more biological, psychological, or whatever, including stresses affected by climate change. So the state of vulnerability determines also your adaptive capacity or your ability to cope with the impacts. So this is a very simple concept. I think the other concept I have was resilience, building capacity. Resilience just means building capacity to absorb and recover from climate-related shocks and stresses. So the resilience of a group of people, of a community, determines how they will adapt. So if you don't have the resilience, which comes in different forms, probably your income levels, because if you're affected by climate change and you don't have money, the effect will be worse. But when you have enough money, you can cope easily by compensating the effect with probably buying whatever it is that you need. If it's too hot, you can cool with a fan, or if it's too cold, you can heat with a heater. Another, and we cope differently. And maybe I should emphasize here, men, women, children, the youth, the elderly, they cope differently with the impacts of climate change, especially around health issues and also how they adapt. Then there's the fifth concept I'm going to look at is climate resilient infrastructure. So what this basically means is that within a setting or within a city or a town, a municipality, we need to design. What this means is that designing and building infrastructure to withstand climate-related stresses. Again, I'm sure Dr. Nchito will talk about it, that in this city, Lusaka, and a few other cities like Luangwa and the other cities that are near rivers and the cities around the sea or oceans, is that if they are prone to flooding, which means they have to make sure that the infrastructure can withstand the flooding, so that when there's flooding, the buildings don't fall or the flood waters don't get in the houses, etc., etc. So that's important. And the strategy is to make sure that the buildings or the infrastructure around the affected areas are resilient to whatever impacts or whatever effects are brought about by climate change. And the other concept is sustainability, and this is embracing environmentally conscious practices and technologies to reduce the carbon footprint. The balance, maintaining the balance between the social benefits, economic gains, and the impact on the environment. This is very important because we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about sustainable development, and we're talking about the balance between the economic outcomes and the social impact or the effect on the people, as well as the effect on the environment. And I think one example I can give here is clearly in terms of pollution. More often, industries pollute because for them, they have to produce, and in their production systems, they need to make money. Doesn't really matter whether they pollute rivers and then that affects the people and they also destroy the environment. But when we talk about sustainability, we are looking at the production system where there's a balance between what the production systems or the profits and the impact on the people, the social benefits, as well as the impact on the environment. So more often than not, in the production systems like mining, industrial development, etc., you find that the emphasis sometimes is more on the production and the profits rather than on the impact on the environment or on the people. So this is another very important concept. And the next slide just shows sustainability, that is that interface between the three: economy, environment, and society. And that constitutes sustainability. And in this small other diagram, I show that people, profit, and planet, these three have to be balanced. And the interlocking areas are the areas of one, the one on the extreme left, right, is the interface between environmental and economic interactions, which relate to energy efficiency, subsidies, incentives for the use of natural resources. And this also borders more on policy. So the policy within a country or within a municipality should make sure that there's energy efficiency, there are subsidies to balance off what comes out of the interactions between the environmental processes, that is natural resource use, environmental management, pollution, prevention, etc. This is pollution of air, water, land, etc. And also on the economic side, profit, cost savings, economic growth, etc. And then on the social and economic, you're looking at business ethics, fair trade, the rights of people, so that whatever happens within an environment or within a setting or within an area, we have to look at the interaction between these squares, these cycles, sorry. And also social, it's very important to look at the standard of living, education, community, equal community opportunities. That's why you find in cases where, like the mining towns, the mining companies are forced to make sure they attend to the needs of the people, because they are creating some kind of environmental disturbance. So they have to make sure they subsidize, say, education or social services. They offer some social corporate responsibility to pay for whatever damage they are doing to their environment, or the profits must be channeled also to these processes, because they are making use of the environment, the natural ecosystem or the natural environment that's supposed to also benefit the people within that locality. So the next concept is ecosystems-based adaptation. I just picked a few which I thought they would be useful. This basically means ecosystem-based adaptation, that is protecting and restoring natural ecosystems like forests, wetlands, and oceans to enhance their climate regulation services. As you know that ecosystems have a regulatory capacity. They regulate quite a number of things to enable human beings to survive and also to have a very acceptable state of well-being. Ecosystem-based adaptation is also a strategy. Maybe I should explain here. Most of the concepts can also be strategies in managing the effects of climate change. So ecosystem-based adaptation is also a strategy for adapting to climate change that harnesses nature-based solutions and ecosystem services. Because ecosystems, when you deplete or when you disturb the natural ecosystems, a lot of things will happen. And especially when there's a lot of loss of biodiversity, then you get a lot of problems in nature. You get a lot of problems for people. You also get a lot of problems for the environment. So biodiversity and ecosystems conservation is very important. Climate change, of course, we need to adapt, so that climate change adaptation and also the people around need to derive benefits from the ecosystem. That's why we talk about nature-based solutions here, because these are some of the strategies that I used. And then another concept I thought would be important was ecosystem services. And as you well know, protecting and restoring natural ecosystems is supposed to maintain essential services like air and water purification, and a lot of other services like provisioning. This is a service provided by nature. Yeah, and mostly we think about food, fruits, vegetables, tree, fish, livestock, etc., which are readily available, direct products from the ecosystem. A provisioning service is any type of benefit to people that can be extracted from nature, along with what I've mentioned above, the food, the water, etc. Anything that a human being gets out of nature is a service which is provided by the natural ecosystem. And of course, we have the regulating service, which is provided by ecosystems. So they provide many basic services that make life possible for people. Plants clean the air, we all know that. Filter water, decompose bacteria, provide bees that pollinate flowers, of course, provide a pollination process, etc., And all these benefits, regulating services, benefit the natural ecosystem, the people, and contribute to the well-being. There's also an important one, cultural services. The natural world has guided our cultural, intellectual, and social development by being a constant force present in our lives. The importance of ecosystems to the human mind can be traced back to the beginning of mankind. From time immemorial, as humans on this planet, we depended on nature. And as our ecosystems get disturbed, we also disturb our cultural services and our coexistence with nature. So there's more to it, including how systems play a role in local, national, and global cultures, the building of knowledge and the spreading of ideas, creativity born from interactions with nature, music, art, architecture, as even recreation. So the ecosystem is very important because of the services they provide. And I think I actually teach a course in cultural heritage and environment, which is a very interesting course. We are linked, intertwined with our natural ecosystem. There's also the supporting service, that is the natural world provides so many services, natural processes such as photosynthesis, nutrient cycling, the creation of soils, and the water cycle. These processes allow for the earth to sustain the basic forms of life, let alone the whole ecosystem and people. So without these services, I think we could have, or we would have, a world which is very difficult to live in. So the next concept I'm going to look at is disaster risk reduction. This is identifying and mitigating the risks associated with climate-related disasters. So whenever we do assessments, environmental impact assessments, we have to look at the disaster risk. We have to look at what is the risk associated with whatever is going to be brought about by climate change. There are a lot of other things that you can do. You can do a vulnerability assessments. You can do cost benefit analysis, etc., But this is done so that the information collected can be used for forecasting or for looking at the future impacts and maybe trying to mitigate or adapt, say, in the coming years. And then you have early warning systems. This is establishing monitoring and alert systems for climate-related hazards. This is also for planning policy processes, just like disaster risk reduction, for policy purposes, so that with an early warning system, you are able to plan and you're able to see how, in case of a disaster, how processes may not stop or activities may not stop. So they are also nature-based
And see that we have lost Gertrude briefly. Let's give her a few minutes and see if she can reconnect. Otherwise, Polly, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so I think we'll come and give her a chance at the end of the session or the training so that she wraps up on the last, just gives a summary of the last concepts. And I would like us to go into the next presentation, which is with Professor Wilman Chito, and we're looking at how do we build climate resilience using nature-based solutions in the community, and what are some of the strategies we can use. Over to you, Professor Chito.
Are you sharing?
I can share if you'd like. Let me just get that.
Okay. Sorry about that earlier. I was relying on a genset and then power came back. But I think it's good that we did start with Gertrude, because she set the foundation of what I'm going to talk about. Because as a planner, if you know about the key concepts, how are you going to use them? How are you going to incorporate these concepts in your day-to-day work? Which is why maybe I was given the topic to look at building climate resilience using nature-based solutions in the community. Next slide, please. I think we've done this before. The next slide. I think I've done next slide. Next slide. Yeah. So the what questions, I think I'll start from here. What exactly are we looking at? And I think this is building on what Ms. Ngenda has been talking about. What is climate resilience? This is something we have to have now because cities are bearing the brunt of climate change, and we really need to change the way we do things. I'm saying climate is changing, and therefore so should we. If we stay doing things the same, it will be at our own peril. So I think Ms. Ngenda already outlined what climate resilience is, but it involves assessing how climate change will create new or alter current climate-related risks. And we need to take, it involves taking steps to better cope with these risks. For instance, it's getting hotter, okay? We've heard of heat islands, but now there's a new, that risk of heat has been altered because it's actually getting hotter. So what are we going to do about it as planners? And as planners, we really need to be in tune. We need to understand what climate change really is, and even the climate terminologies. For instance, in the past season, we were being told that this is an El Nino season. What came to our minds? What did we think about? Did we think it was going to impact our work, our day-to-day work? So if next year, or if this season we're told it will be La Nina, what does it mean? What are we going to communicate to our community? So we really need to actively understand the climate terminologies and how climate change is affecting our communities. Then we move to nature-based solutions. These are natural alternatives which are used to solve problems. And Gertrude talked about ecosystem functions. So when we use natural alternatives to retain water, to reduce urban heat, to enhance biodiversity, and to have sustainable food production and increase human health and well-being, this is what is termed as nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. So why do we need to act? Why is it important that we start acting? Well, the projections are predicting drier and hotter temperatures. I think some countries have hit the two degrees mark. We were told that if we hit 2 degrees, that's a disaster. So if we're hitting the 2 degrees mark, it means we are in a disaster mode. So, and the projections are predicting extreme weather events, which we have seen, floods, droughts, and this, of course, will stress the environment, and it also increase incidence of pathogens and disease. So we'll have more diseases. In the southern region, we've been dealing with cholera. All these are things that as planners, we cannot ignore. And definitely poorer communities suffer more and they have fewer options for mitigation. They have fewer resources at household level to build resilience. And what we're seeing is a depletion of ecosystem services in and around our cities. And this is happening at alarming rates. We are cutting down trees, we are paving our yards, and this is all at a time when we're talking about hotter temperatures. If you've been listening to the news this year, with every month, I think starting from last October, every report would say, this is the hottest October from time immemorial. This is the hottest November. This is the hottest December. Up to around, I think, even May, I think, or April was the hottest April. So it's definitely getting hotter, but have our actions changed in any way? And of course, we're seeing an increase in incidences of water contaminations. In Lusaka, where we use boreholes drying up. We're now having rationing of water. These are all realities which, as a planner, they're on your table. And how are you going to think differently? Next slide, please. So the who questions. So who should be involved? If you're sitting at your table and thinking, I want to solve this problem, who would you involve and how? So definitely you have to do stakeholder mapping because this is collaborative. No one field can solve the climate problem in our cities. So you need to have a multi-stakeholder approach. And this stakeholder mapping will help you decide who should have a seat at the table. And mind you, there are different tables. You have one table maybe for finding the problem. You have another table for finding the solutions, and then you have another table for dissemination and action. So at each stage, you need to decide who's going to sit at the table. And you also have to carefully select and plan engagements in a manner that will allow all the voices to be heard. We do know that there are some voices which tend to be loud, but that doesn't mean that they're correct. So you need to plan to have all voices having the same time and respect. And in my work and research, we have found that city learning labs have really been effective. And this is a strategy where you invite key stakeholders to participate in activities. This is various activities. And this helps in identifying the problem and also suggesting solutions. And with these different stakeholders sitting in a room for a day or two, looking at the history of the problem, finding out why do we have, for instance, climate, the heat in Lusaka rising, and then what are the possible solutions? So you have a situation where you can instantly critique suggestions. If someone says, let's plant trees, someone will say, but in an unplanned settlement, where is the space? Or I'm in a flooded area. So you have an instant critiquing of the suggestions, but this is one mode that works where you have people in a room from different institutions, the community, you have learning institutions, you have various actors who are involved in both the problem and the solution. Next slide, please. This is just a picture showing one of the activities in one of the learning labs that we've had. Next slide, please. So there you have community members and academics, people from the local authority, local government, etc. So this is just a picture showing what you should do in stakeholder mapping, and you need to have effective participation. So you need to give people information, you need to consult, you need to have joint decision making, you need to have joint actions. This is for the sustainability of project actions. And then you need to go beyond. We know that in Zambia, for instance, and in most parts of the world, once a project ends, the funding ends, there's no support for that community to continue that activity. So you need to plan for that as well. Next slide. This is also another action that you can do to identify your stakeholders. Some stakeholders have high power levels, some have high interest levels. So you map them and see which stakeholders do we need at the table who have high power and who have high interest. Those are the ones you really want at the beginning. But in later stages, if you can get even those with low power and low interest, sometimes they have very good ideas and solutions. So this is just to help you select your stakeholders who will sit at you at the table. Next slide, please. So once you've decided who should act, for instance, in nature-based solutions, so as you're identifying the problems, the actors can also be identified. And in the collaborative process of problem identification, you're allowed to collaborate as well in identifying the solutions. So it's not you as a planner sitting alone saying, I need 100 trees for Kanyama. It's all the stakeholders who would have come together and said, look, for Kanyama, we need this shrub, or we need to plant grass, or we need A, B, C, D, or we need green roofs or something like that. And it also, a collaborative process also allows stakeholders to identify their role in the solution. And they put their cards on the table to say, I can bring this, I can bring the trees, or I can bring the labor, or I can bring the technology. For instance, biogas, we're experiencing load shedding. We're talking about ecosystem services, and yet we're a nation that relies heavily on charcoal. And we really need to make a shift. We have a lot of waste, but the technology for biogas needs to get to the low-income households. Biochar for compost, for manure or compost technologies. So some institutions may have this technology, and you can have a technology transfer done with the communities. Next slide, please. So the how question continues. As you are planning, as a planner, you need to be aware of certain situations. For instance, there are 5 dimensions. You have the temporal dimension, which is time. So how long is this action going to take? Or what type of action is this? Is it a short-term action or a long-term action? Because these have implications. And sometimes we forget that some of our actions are actually long-term, but maybe you have a project that is 1 year, and you're planning for a long-term action that will need extra support. And hence you find that your project fails. Then you also have spatial dimensions. How are you, which space are you attending to? Is it a localized space at a household level? Is it a settlement space or a communal space? Is it a city space? This all have implications on the actions that you should take at that particular time. If it's a city space, you may need laws to be changed, and that is longer term. So as a planner, you need to ensure that you have specified, or you've thought through this spatial dimension. Then there's a functional dimension, and this involves setting clear goals, like who is going to run with certain activities, who is needed, what legalities are there, and how are you going to take this on into the future. And sometimes we forget, and we do not take this into consideration. Then you have social equity. Okay. In most activities, there are winners and losers, and we don't spend time thinking through this in collaborative spaces. We assume that everybody is a winner, and sometimes because we don't think through these processes or consult, you end up losing the key people. And if you lose the community, then they will not participate. If they think they are just here to make money off us, look, they put a big billboard in our community, they're making money, they will withdraw. So you need to look at the equity that is being evolved or developed. And the final one is, although I can't see it, it's species diversity. There are certain species that have negative impacts, but we don't really care. We don't really think or consult horticulturalists to see if we plant this type of species, how is it going to impact the other species? Another dimension or thing to look at when you think of dimensions is how, for instance, in the spatial dimension, if I improve this space, how is it going to affect other spaces around it? Or for instance, if I dig a drainage here, how is it going to impact people downstream? So you need to look at all these different dimensions and to avoid conflict and to allow for continuity. Next slide, please. So just to give an example of what we've done before in unplanned settlements, this is taken from a project that we did in our department. And we did a community flood mapping. This is where we involved the community in the mapping of the areas that flooded. So it's collaborative. We had the local authority, we had the university, we had the NGO, and we had the community. This process I think it's more productive because once you're able to show to the community that, look, it's nobody's fault. It's the slope, it's the gradient, it's the soils, it's the underlying rocks. This is why you are flooded. So it's really you who is not supposed to be here. Then when you come up with a solution, they will understand that, look, even if government were to come in, this will not change. This is the environment that they are in. So even with nature-based solutions, if you carry people with you and show them that, look, if we were to plant a green or to grow a green area here, we will reduce the heat in this area, or we'll provide shade for children when they're walking to school. If you work with the community and do the mapping, they're able to appreciate and they're able to sustain the projects. So when we did the mapping, we produced a hazard map showing the areas which are prone to mapping. So this is where I was saying each actor provides a solution or provides a component of the solution. Next slide, please. So that's just an example of what now the academics did after we did the community mapping with the community and other actors. Then as academics, we added on GIS and other aspects and came up with this flood hazard area. So when you can go back to the community and say, look, you are actually in a flood prone area. So you will need now to either look at the stream that is causing flooding and do something about that stream. Next slide, please. We're still on the who. So another activity we did was to ask, we had a long questionnaire and we were asking communities about their perceptions on flood timelines and incidences. So we asked them, when do you mostly experience floods? So they said December to April, and it peaks, and then the worst incidences were January to March, and they also talked about extreme climate change effects, which they felt from December to August. So you had a high water table, and so they themselves relate what their experience of climate change. It's not you preaching to them saying climate change is ABCD, it's more rain. Let them give their perception on flood timelines, their incidences of floods, and their coping with flood situations. Next slide, please. So again, this is part of the how. So collaboration is inclusive, okay? And it also takes into consideration emerging power relations. And when I talk about emerging power relations, it's not always that power relations remain the same, okay? For instance, in the past regime in Zambia, if you want to go into a community, you had not only to talk to the local authority, who are supposed to have authority over that area, but the MP, and you also had to, in some instances, deal with so-called commandos. Those were the power relations that existed, whether we liked it or not. And as a planner, if you're going to ignore the changing power relations and try to go above and beyond them, you will not really move. So sometimes you don't be oblivious to what's going on around you. And as planners, we need to integrate ecology and with planning. Green is not only environmental planner. In fact, every planner should be an environmental planner, because you're planning for areas which involve the environment as well. And so we need to broaden our scope, involve ecologists, horticulturalists, and landscape planners. And green spaces are not a luxury looking at climate change. They have to be prioritized if we are going to mitigate the impacts of climate change. And that's something we are not doing enough, especially in our country. If anything, we're eliminating the few green spaces that are there, and we are really going to feel the impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. So the how, it's a breath of fresh air when you see actions which are solutions which are positive. So here is an example of community and nature-based solutions. This is the Kanyama Green Innovation Center. It's in the heart of Kanyama. Kanyama is an unplanned settlement, the largest unplanned settlement in Lusaka. And these women, the women folk, they're part of an NGO, the women and the youths, they found a space which was occupied by a waste dump. They cleared out the waste dump with the help of, is it CARE? Or I can't remember the agency. And they started planting grass and trees, and they're growing, if you can see in the right-hand side, they're growing plants for sale. Okay, so it's also income generation. Water was supplied by the NGO that is supporting them, but even the temperature, when you get, I think we went towards the end of the year when it was hot. When you got to this green space, it actually felt cooler, okay? So here is an example of a nature-based solution. Women are making money, they're doing biochar, they're doing biogas. So that's the technology transfer part of collaboration. And I am convinced that if we take other people from other communities, because people say, but where are we going to find the land? There are areas where there are dump sites. If you clear, there are so many unplanned settlements which can do the same. And that's another part of the City Learning Lab. It's to take people to see, visibly see or participate. So you take people on study tours to see what you're talking about. So this is an example of nature-based solutions. So in the heart of Kanyama, and they do training there, they train other communities. Next slide. I think I should be coming to the end. So I'm just leaving our planners with a question. How can nature-based solutions mitigate these hazards? On the left, we have, I think this is in George Compound. It's waterlogged, it's during the rainy season. The water table has risen. You can see that house, how far the water is seeping in. What nature-based solutions can we use? We have to start thinking of that. On the right, this is Kalikiliki, that's the stream. It's full of waste. I think there's that toilet right next there. And so what immediate solutions can we think about when we see such situations? Because this is a reality on the ground, okay? If you look at the roofs, they are corrugated, so the people are going to be heating up. There are very few trees. At least Kalikiliki has more trees which provide shade. So these are some of the issues that we need to start helping communities solving on their own. Next slide. I think it's the last one. Okay, so on this slide, I just wanted to show that when you ask a community, what can you do? They will come up with solutions. They're not blank. That's why it's called knowledge co-production. They also have knowledge to share with us. So if you go with them with nature-based solution issue, they will be able to tell you even which plants will grow fast or which plants will help suck up water. So we shouldn't treat communities as blank slates, people who don't know anything and they can't bring anything to the table. Next slide. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, I just wanted to say that climate change is not gender neutral. Everybody's affected, the youths, women mostly, they sell their goods in the sun. They need shade, okay? And I must say nature-based solutions have not been adequately integrated into our interventions. We need to start thinking of them. I've already said women bear the largest burden, and household level mitigation measures, they work, you know? So we need to bring them on board when we're looking for solutions. And the fact that communities are ready with solutions provides an entry point for suggestions for nature-based solutions, either long-term or short-term. And I must also say site visits are a successful way of changing people's minds about certain things very fast. Thank you. I think that's my last slide.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Nchito, for that wonderful presentation. We got a few comments in our chat and questions. I think the first question from Saya was, what actions has the government taken to encourage citizens from disposing of waste, particularly plastic, in order to lessen the negative effects on the environment? That's the first question. The first comment is, this is good and insightful, from Natasha Zulu. Then we have the last question is, when was the study that was done by UNZA taken? So maybe we can pick up those before we go to the next speakers. So over to you. Oh.
Is there any for Ms. Ngenda?
No, I think those were the first ones that we had, but we'll still have a question and answer session at the end of this.
Okay, just quickly on the waste, there's an SI on waste, but it's the regulation and implementation of these SIs. No one has ever been, well, if they are charged, there are very few who have been charged. And my argument is that we need to start with the children. We need to start training children to separate waste, not to just litter anyhow, because children learn, they do what they see. So if they see adults throwing litter out of a car, they'll do that. So I don't think we're doing enough on the litter issue. Our drainages are full of litter, and something needs to be done urgently. The study, I think 2016, I've seen Dr. Siami on this. 2016, I think it was part of a larger project. 2016, I think we were finishing 2017 or 2018. I'm not sure. It's not that recent. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Having listened to both presentations, the concepts from Madam Ngenda, maybe Madam Ngenda, do you have a comment on the solid waste before I move to the next speaker?
Yeah, that's like my specialty, huh? But what is happening recently, I don't know, Lusaka City Council did attempt to plant trees at the dump site. just to make the front of the dump site attractive. Maybe that's another thing. And also the city, I think, is planning another area to green another area, which will look like the Kanyama Green Innovative Center in Chawama. So that's a lessons learned from the Kanyama Green Innovation Center. So the Chawama people also want to do an innovation center. I'm also told there's one in Kabwata. So the settlements in Lusaka are trying very hard to green the city. And they are using former dump sites within the communities to have these green centers.
Okay. Thank you for the comment. Having listened to the speakers, we'll go to our next speaker. That's Ida. Ida, I hope you're online. So Ida Sakala will give us a reflection on the two presentations and also sharing of the example of solutions.
Thank you,
Ida,
Waya.
over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I just wanted to comment on Professor Nchito's presentation and Ms. Ngenda. They've pretty much said most of the things and their presentations were insightful. So based on what they've said, we can conclude that collaboration indeed is the way to go if we are to mitigate the effects of climate change. And the only way we can do this is if we can implore nature-based solutions. And we have a lot of options for nature-based solutions, but we need something that can work for Lusaka. We have heard of experiences of flooding. It's either there's excessive rainfall or no rainfall at all. And also we have issues of drainage systems, and also the current load shedding we're experiencing is as a result of climate change. But since we know these things, how do we as planners and all those other stakeholders work together so that we can control and mitigate the challenges that we are facing? So from the presentations, we noticed that the key factors that they mentioned were that there is need for community engagement. We need people on board, because the poor communities are the ones suffering the most because they have no options on how they can perhaps overcome the effects of climate change. But how can we help them? If we train them, inform them, and also sensitize them on the importance of nature-based solutions, we can be able to help them. And if we also collaborate in our planning and thinking, for us as planners, we shouldn't just look at planning as producing a layout plan for us who are in spatial planning. We should consider some of the things like how do we incorporate nature and all these other water bodies around us. So perhaps in our planning, we can consider some of the plans like garden city concepts. Those are environmental friendly and can at least be resilient when it comes to climate change. So some examples we can also consider green infrastructure. When we come to green infrastructure, we've noticed like lately, almost every other resident wants to pave their yard, like do concrete pavements, but we don't know what the repercussions are for that. So we realize that instead of the water being drained in the ground, it runs off because we have completely paved up the entire area. So why don't we try something like permeable paving that can allow at least water to be absorbed? We use clay materials. And also when we look at some of the things like rainwater harvesting, in events when we have abnormal rainfalls and it's bound to flood, we can employ technologies on how we can harvest the rains so that we can avoid an event of excessive rains and we have poor drainages in Lusaka, which can lead to outbreaks like cholera in the recent past, like what we experienced. So we can try to harvest the rain so that we can also work in collaboration with other companies, business owners, NGOs, and also just the local authorities so that we can help them cope with the pressure. And also we can try to also work on urban agriculture. We encourage community gardens, like the example Dr. Nchito gave on the Kanyama project. where they've put up a botanical garden and the area in question has been cleared up and they're selling plants and flowers. That's a very good initiative. So we can also encourage community gardens and also rooftop gardens so that we can control the heat and the temperatures around the area. Also encourage vertical farming instead of using up the whole space for development and all other things. We can at least encourage vertical farming so that some of the space can be preserved just for nature, so that we can be able to control and mitigate the effects of climate change. There was also a picture she shared, I think the second last slide, where she was showing two examples of an unplanned settlement where the water, either the drainage is blocked or perhaps there's garbage around the water area. So there's a water, I think there was a stream or something. So in as much as we would want to construct, we need to look into consideration some of those things like the water bodies, how do we protect them? And if they've been completely used up or they've been contaminated, how can we restore such wetlands? Because these wetlands are what will help us mitigate the challenges of climate change. And also, as we are doing our spatial planning as planners, it's imperative that we consider other factors other than just providing motorist ways. Why don't we plan for smart streets like pedestrian walkways, cyclist ways, so that at least we can be able to mitigate the challenges of climate change, in the sense that we'll have more people cycling and staying healthy, and also we'll have safe neighborhoods for our communities where they have side walkways rather than just using public transport and also polluting the environment through the combustion of the energies. So the presentations pretty much said most of the things. So for nature-based solutions, we can just sum it up to say, if we can try to have green infrastructure, urban tree canopies, plant as much as we can consult the community. We have those long-time serving community members who know which plant to be planted where, and how are they when it comes to absorbing water, and what shade they can provide. They can be able to provide us with that information as we collaborate and work together in trying to mitigate the effects of climate change. We can also consider green roofs, like I talked about earlier, those like vegetated rooftops where we plant something. There are high-rise buildings in Lusaka, so most of the space is taken up and paved. Why don't we try to plant, perhaps provide something on our buildings, like a garden where we can provide some vegetation there. And also we can also try to do rain gardens where we have planted areas that can just simply filter water. And also more like the polluted water can be filtered and cleaned up through these rain gardens. And this can only be achieved if we have collaborated efforts and training. In as much as we would have the know-how on how to go about this, we need other people on board, because resources are involved. Then there's need to invest in infrastructure, innovation and creativity, and also technology that will be needed in order to have a successful implementation of nature-based solutions. So we need everyone on board. And also when it comes to policy making and implementation, there's no one entity or government institution that can think on behalf of everyone and conclude to say, these are some of the policies that work for us, and this is how we'll go about it. So in a nutshell, nature-based solutions are the way to go, and they can only be achieved if we collaborate as partners. Thank you very much.
Ida, I'll go to Wendo. Wendo, please give us your insights, and maybe you can give us some examples of how we can engage the different stakeholders, looking at your experience where you've been involved in the development of integrated land resource governance projects. You could give us how did you engage the stakeholders to deal with the impacts of climate change on nature-based solutions. Wendo, over to you.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for the previous presenters who for giving us so much insightful information pertaining to collaborative thinking in climate change, even as we look at resilience and we're looking at sustainability of our cities and our areas where we are found. And I want to appreciate also the key concepts that were presented by Madam Linda, as well as the insightful presentation from Professor Chitwa. And it has, in a nutshell, given us a picture of how, or the importance rather, of stakeholder engagement when it comes to climate change. Now, first and foremost, maybe what we would want to understand is, okay, what is the importance of collaboration, or rather, why should we stress on stakeholder engagement when it comes to dealing with the issues of climate change? Now, we do not want to undermine the irrelevance or the importance of individual efforts that we are doing at our individual capacities in dealing or fighting against climate change, but we must also recognize the fact that there is power in groups. Now, also what we should remember as well is that climate change is multifaceted and it cuts across different aspects. Could be geographical boundaries, cultural, as well as disciplinary boundaries or borders. So we find that no man has got all the information that is required for us to deal with this effect that you are working with, and there's no one who's going to have all the resources readily available for us to sort out certain issues. And these are some of the reasons why we need to harness around the importance of collaborating, coming together, sharing insights, sharing resources, and the knowledge and the skill set that we have so that we can foster innovation and also the collective action. Now, like I said also, like there's no single institution or organization, rather, maybe let's say government or the private sector, that is going to have everything that is required to address the multifaceted dimensions of climate change. So now, the collaborative action needs become central in that aspect, so that every individual comes with their different knowledge, comes with different skills, and individual acts, we should remember that they're amplified by group efforts. So greater things will only be done or can only be realized when individuals come together and they put their skills and resources together in a collaborative environment. Now, even as we think of working with collaborating, engaging as stakeholders, Dr. Chitwa in her Professor Chitwa in her presentation also mentioned one of the key things, that is stakeholder power and interest. So now the first and foremost thing, even as we identify the issues that we are dealing with, which is climate change, we need to look at a stakeholder mapping. Who is going to get involved? Like she mentioned, there's stakeholder power. There are those with high power and low interest, high power, and we need to, at the preliminary stages, we need to make use of those who've got high power and high interest as well. As we go on, we get to recruit other people. So we need to identify and to analyze various individuals, groups, organizations, and entities that have got interest with the issues at hand, which is now climate change. Now, there are different stakeholders that we can work with. There's government, there are communities, there are NGOs, academia, and also other private sector organizations. So now, each of these stakeholders have got a different roles that they are playing. When we talk of government, there's policy development that is involved, there's regulatory frameworks, and also funding allocation. When we talk about communities, we are looking at the local knowledge. You remember before this modern information and everything that we're working with that have come as a result of technology, the communities had their own way of how they were preserving, and most of these issues, those who lived then, they would say these things, you are seeing them for the very first time, meaning there was a way that they were dealing with their issues without experiencing these issues. So their local knowledge is very important. Their participation also in adaptation projects is important, and also certain behaviors. My previous speaker Ida talked about pavements of all the yards in our environment. So some of the times we do certain things out of ignorance. We do not know the impact of the behaviors that you are doing or the activities that you are doing. So now people need to be informed so that the behavior as well, how they approach and deal with when it comes to their development of individual properties. If they are informed, you see them adjusting. So when it comes to NGOs, there's the issue of implementation of nature-based project advocacy, and also capacity building. These communities need to be taught. They need to see the importance of what is being talked about. They want to reference, okay, where has it happened before? What are the benefits that people are getting? When it comes to academia as stakeholders, we are talking of research, data collection, and also knowledge dissemination. They are influential by sharing their findings from their research, and they can influence decision and policymakers. They are framing their policies, as they're making their laws and pieces of registration, the information that is coming from the academia, the research world, the research institutions is going to inform them, even as they do things, and you end up having those effective policies which are going to be beneficial, even as we are fighting against this climate change. And then also when it comes to the private sector, in terms of investment in green technologies, these are some of the nature-based solutions that my previous speaker was talking about. The investment in green technologies, we're talking of urban forestry, we're talking about green infrastructure, and also in sustainable practices, and also social corporate responsibilities. Now, when different stakeholders come together, like for example, government collaboration, they're different. There's national level, provincial, and local level. So it's also in stages. We engage the stakeholders according to the level where you start from on top. As you come down, you rehearse, you engage them differently. You explain what the idea is all about, and you bring them together while they understand. Now, from my experience working on the integrated land and resource governance project in Eastern Province, as well as Zambia integrated forest and landscape project in Eastern Province. It was dealing with sustainable natural resource management, which was also looking at enhancing the livelihood sources of the local people. So it was implemented. ZIFU, Zambia Integrated Forest and Landscape Project, was implemented again across all the districts of Eastern Province. Now it was looking at some of these behavior that people do, maybe the cutting down of trees, the rampant change of land uses, as a result that people are trying to find livelihood sources. They are failing, they're trying to find means of survival, but because things may not be on their favor now, they end up engaging themselves in certain behaviors. At the end of the day, it's also impacting. They're not getting much in as much as they are putting in their all to realize something. So now, the first step when it comes to communities in the rural setup, they've got their own traditional leadership. So the first step, as you engage the stakeholders, you deal with their own traditional chiefs. So when the chiefs they are sensitized, they are taught about the benefits and also the importance of these sustainable natural resource management, and also their advisors. Chiefs come with the advisors, we call them indunas in Eastern Province. When those people understand, they're actually key when you get to the community and speaking to their communities, because when they hear it from their leaders, it's much more easier than just seeing Lendo just coming from nowhere in the community and trying to tell them about something they haven't heard elsewhere. So now, in all these things, as we do these activities, there's also issue of resources. As we all know, the main funder, we find that it's the government which provides these resources, but also not enough because they are competing needs. Now, the private sector as well, they come on board and they bring in the funding aspect. So as we went into the ground, the integrated land resource governance project was funded by USAID under Tetra Tech Ad. So now they provided that resources, and they provided resources to get on the ground to sensitize the communities and to help them. So now one of the good examples that I can talk about the success story of the stakeholder engagement process when it comes to nature-based solutions for climate change is the community forest program that is being spearheaded by the Ministry of Green Economy and Environment under the Department of Forest. So now we find that they are investing into this community forest group, formation of community forest group. Now, these community forest groups, as the communities come together, they identify land, and then they make that land reserved as a forest group. Now, as they reserve the trees, they plant more trees and those other indigenous trees as well. And now they are also benefiting from the forest they're conserving. They're also getting some non-timber forest products such as the mushrooms. They also use them for other things like beekeeping, and at the end of the day, they are realizing something out of it. Now, when they see their friends, some of the sample districts that where the project started, like in what district is this? Before you enter Chipata, there's Kasenengwa. when the neighboring communities saw how the communities in Kaseninga were doing in terms of forest, community forest groups and the benefits they're realizing, they are also interested. So it becomes a lot more easier to engage other stakeholders when they are seeing results. And also when we take the example of the case study that Professor Nchitwa gave from Kanyama, when other communities around Lusaka, as they are sensitized, make use of other people dealing directly with that project, they talk about their journey, they talk about the benefits they realize, it becomes a lot more easier to convince other people, especially the communities in the neighborhoods where we are coming from, to understand and also to see the need and the importance of switching to nature-based solutions. Now, one thing also that we don't need to forget is that even as the stakeholders might want to come on board, but when you look at our pieces of legislation that are currently existing, they limit also other stakeholders to come on board. So now if they are left out, or if maybe the lead stakeholder who's supposed to take up the role, because that's what the laws of Zambia the laws are providing for, they are not in the forefront, becomes a lot more, it becomes hard to spearhead certain activities because the law does not allow. So we need to work together to identify these stakeholders and also to make sure that everything that we do, it is done in a collaborative manner and also coordinated if we are to see the change that we really so desire in terms of nature-based solution and also looking at mitigating and adapting to climate change. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Wendo. Thank you for that presentation. I will go straight to Sylvia. I hope Sylvia is online. Sylvia is working with the central government, and she's got experience in urban planning, urban design and development, socioeconomic planning and project management. And she's in charge of policy and planning in the ministry. So Sylvia, from the two presentations, the concept and Tito's presentation, would like you to give us a reflection on how you have tried to address the impacts of climate change using a multi-stakeholder approach. Main theme. Thank you. Over to you, Sylvia. I hope you're ready.
Yes, I am. Hope you can hear me. And I hope you can see me now. Sorry, I was just trying to move to a place where there was better lighting. Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction. And just to recognize the brilliant submissions that have been made so far, Madam Ngenda and Professor Nchito are our seasoned planners, and we appreciate the presentation that has been made. Ida and Wendo, thank you so much for those. And they definitely resonate with what I have to say. I mean, after such brilliant presentations, I'll probably just be repeating what they said. But I will, as much as possible, try to give the experience from the perspective of policy and from our work at ministry level. So in terms of reflections, from Madam Ngenda's presentation, she did speak, she did allude to the fact that Lusaka is highly urbanized and built up. And I just wanted to reflect on that to say that pretty much Lusaka city is all built up. The open areas, most of them are taken. The farmland is pretty much taken, and it's been spilling over its boundaries into the other districts. And this has affected, obviously, the climate of the area and impacted on climate change. Also, there are initiatives, obviously policy initiatives, that I will speak about later on that are in place to try and address those issues. Particularly, I also like the fact that she talked about the adaptive capacity of the urban poor, and that we need to see how we'll get them to to adapt to climate change? Do they even have the capacity? Do they have the means? Because for as long as they don't have the means, they don't have even just a simple livelihood, it's very difficult to talk about adaptive capacity. I think that formed part of my reflection, and I'll speak to that as well. Professor Nchito's presentation, I mean, there were so many talking points and I don't want to repeat them, but I particularly liked the aspect of engagement with communities to understand what resilience means. It's very important that we understand what resilience is from the perspective of our stakeholders, particularly the communities. And it's very easy for us to bring with us our policies, our academic information and all this research to bring to them and dictate what resilience is. But it's very important to understand, and I like the fact that she demonstrated what it's like to understand what resilience is from the point of the communities. I think that's very important. Also on who are we talking about when it comes to resilience and adaptation? And the fact that we need to bring these conversations and these actions as low as possible to the communities and not just concentrate them at the national level or semi-national level, but really bring them down to the people. And I'm saying this because it forms the background of the current policy direction, for instance, at government level. Currently, all policies that speak to climate adaptation or climate resilience or addressing the impact of climate change speak to the need to localize our actions. For a very long time, I think, as a country, and probably even outside on a regional or global level, we have been concentrating our actions at a higher level. And these actions have not been reaching our communities. So if we're providing financing to address climate impact to climate change, has it reached the local level? Has it reached? We just talked about the various levels. I think in the presentation that was given by Dr. Nchito of interventions, we have the national level, we have the regional level, we have the local level, and we have the household level. How many of these interventions actually reach the local level? And according to the United Nations, we do not expect to achieve even just about 65% of our targets in the Sustainable Development Goals if we do not localize our actions, if we do not work with the local and the regional governments, if we do not empower them to participate and to get stakeholders at the citizen level to participate. And this is very, very important. So in terms of government interventions at this level, it's informed by a lot of what has already been talked about. Obviously, it's informed by the growing urban population, the urbanization itself, which is rapid and has resulted in informal settlements where we have over 60% of our populations in the urban areas living in informal settlements, especially in Lusaka. And obviously, this has contributed to climate change with the rising of temperatures and emissions and so on. Now, we have seen the impacts which speak to droughts. Currently, we are experiencing droughts in the country, and there's actually a proclamation or declaration by the presidency that this is a national emergency, and there's actions now that are being concentrated towards building resilience against this drought. We have seen flooding, particularly also in Lusaka and also in other areas of the country, and high temperatures and even diseases. We may even relate some of the epidemics that have happened, like the cholera epidemic, to climate change, because when we have flooding and when we have people living in areas that are ecologically sensitive, we do get these repercussions. Now, in terms of what the ministry is doing, for instance, or what government is doing at ministry level, our experience has been that one, the actualization of the decentralization policy or the implementation of the actual national decentralization policy has a lot of impact in terms of building capacities at local level to increase adaptation, to increase mitigation, and generally the capacity of people at the local level to address climate impact. Particularly, I mean, this is probably one of government's biggest flagship programs. So I would probably have to start with it. Those that are in Zambia will know that if you're from the Ministry of Local Government or if you're from the local authorities, the very first thing you're going to talk about is the Constituency Development Fund. For those that are not in Zambia, this fund has been increased. It's a community fund that initially started to fund micro projects at community level to empower people to participate more in development. But in the past 2 to 3 years, this fund has been increased over 1,000%. And it goes to particular localities or constituencies to allow people to decide what they want to do. Now, recently, there's been a particular promotion of the use of these funds towards resilience at community level. So if we're doing community projects, about 60% of the amount that is given goes towards community projects. There's been a policy push to get people to develop those community projects that will build resilience in their localities. If it's loans or grants that maybe entrepreneurs are accessing, there's been a particular push to ensure that they apply these funds towards projects that are going to increase resilience. So that is one intervention. The other one is a deliberate policy which actually has always been there for the fund, which allocates about 5% of a contingency towards disasters, which most likely usually will happen because of climate change. So that's at the decentralization, from the decentralization perspective and devolution of funds. I will speak to integrated development planning, which is, I think, very key even to this conversation because we're talking about collaboration and everyone participating. And this also has been one of the greatest policy initiative or push by the ministry to ensure that every local authority, we have 116 local authorities in the country, to ensure that they have an integrated development plan. By the nature of this plan, it brings together all stakeholders to come together and identify what their areas of need are, and then prioritizing what they should do with whatever resources from various areas are available. And we felt that this is very important if we are going to Yes, we felt that this is very important if we're going to especially decentralize and get citizens to participate and prioritize areas of development for themselves. So the IDP is actually being promoted and more resources are being put towards development of integrated development plans. And I think currently, we're coming from a place where we only had a handful of local authorities with integrated development plans. I think we've come to a point where we have, I think, close to about 90 out of 116, and we anticipate to have at least all the 116 local authorities have integrated development plans by the end of the year. The other one that I could speak to is the National Spatial Development Framework. We did allude to the fact that there's various levels of interventions. So at national level, what is our framework and what are the policy provisions? So the first policy provision that we have, obviously, the first overarching framework that we have is the 8th National Development Plan, which is very clear on how we should address climate change and how we should facilitate adaptative and mitigation measures. But from the spatial aspect, there has been a gap because we have not had an overarching framework at national level that will guide development. So we have a framework that guides socioeconomic development, but then we did not have a framework that guides spatial development. And we know that this is very important because development does not happen in space. It has to happen on the ground, and it has to be guided, and we have to make sure that we protect those environmentally sensitive areas, and we have to make sure that resources and development is directed towards spaces that will be that will ensure that development is sustainable. So this is another dimensional, multi-institutional activity that is being done, where we have a collection of stakeholders at national level that come in to give their input so that we come up with a national spatial development framework. It's going to be the first of its kind in the country, and I think this is also something that is very progressive towards collaborative action against climate change impact. And it's going to have a particular component that speaks to this and will outline how stakeholders should collaborate. This is very, very important. The other one, I think the last one I should say, is the deliberate policy to upgrade settlements. I did speak to the fact that about over 60% of the urban population in Lusaka resides in informal settlements. So you can imagine the extent to which we have informal settlements in the country, or just in Lusaka in particular, and the problems, the urban problems that arise coming from this. And I think government felt that it's very important that we address this. It's actually been proclaimed from a presidential level to have all squatter settlements upgraded. Dr. Chito mentioned Kanyama. I think even Madam Genda and others mentioned these huge unplanned settlements that we have and the problems that we face because of these unplanned settlements. So currently there is a project that is planning to resettle one of the largest unplanned settlements, probably in the country, which is Kanyama, and also another one which is adjacent to it, and it's called George Compound. Now, this project is receiving a lot of prioritization by government. There's resources that are being put into this project to replan and also redevelop it and get those people, for instance, those that are going to be affected by the upgrading, to have them resettled and set up in a properly planned area with guided obviously by environmental principles to ensure that this is sustainable. I think this is one of the major projects that are happening right now, and a major demonstration towards to commitment, I feel, to upgrade this settlement and improve the lives of people. You know, recently when we had the cholera outbreak, Kanyama was actually an epicenter. And it's felt that once we upgrade the settlement, it's also one of the areas that floods. Once we upgrade the settlement and the adjacent one, all these problems should at least be resolved. And it's basically being done also keeping in mind all the environmental principles that we have talked about with regards to mitigation and also adaptation, and bringing in new environmental solutions, recycling and better waste collection and better drainage, and so on and so forth. So that is also another key experience that we've had, which is ongoing, and we're looking forward to it having at least the impact that we are expecting. I won't go much into solid waste management, but I will speak about.
Sorry, Sylvia. I think we'll need to appoint another station, another training.
Okay, so let me just.
Yeah, I'll give you a minute to wrap up because my session is almost one.
Okay, that's fine. I'm actually just finishing up. I'm I was going to just talk about capacity building as the last issue of the local authorities. So in our collaborative thinking and in our quest to address the impact of climate change, it's very important that local authorities who are at the ground and who interact with the communities have the right capacities. And I must say that there hasn't been, in terms specifically to climate change, there hasn't been a lot of financing, there hasn't been a lot of technical capacities being brought down to the local authorities. And I think we're looking forward to this, collaborating with other institutions. We're looking forward to more resources reaching the local authorities for climate change, and more trainings, of course, being undertaken at the local level, so that we have a more sustainable intervention against the impact of climate change. So these are, well, I think this submission is what I had prepared for this conversation, and I'd just like to thank you for the opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I would like to thank everyone, our speakers, our participants, for attending this session and the training. We look forward to more. And I would love to thank ICLEI for this opportunity as well. And I am happy that the conversation and the training has covered our themes that include gender equity and representation, climate adaptation and disaster reduction and recovery, climate mitigation, multi-level governance, data information, smart cities, technologies, and everything that will help us build a resilient Lusaka. And I'm also happy that we got examples from the other cities. And thank you everyone for attending this training. We look forward to more trainings, and we hope we can share the recording as soon as it's ready with everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. And it was a great conversation.